Hello everyone, welcome to a new Process Mining Café. Today we are here to talk about the Process Mining Camp, which took place for the 13th time this year on 14th June, so roughly 1 month ago. I'm here today in the cafe with Rudy, and we have two guests. Our guests are Bhawana Bindal from Zalando and Lieven Bewaert from Atlas Copco. Hello everyone.
Hi.
No.
It's great to have you. So we're going to start in just 1 or 2 minutes. Before we do that, I want to remind you all that we like to do these Process Mining Café sessions live. So that also means it's an opportunity for you to talk with us while we are on the air. You can do that through the chat. So right below where you are watching this, there is the option to join a chat. You don't need an account or anything. Just type a name, some name, and you're in there and you can add any comments or questions that you have. Now, so we wanted to talk about the Process Mining Camp this year, how that was for two groups of people. First of all, there were, of course, those of you who were with us in Eindhoven. We hope you had a great time, as great as we had it. It was really nice. We want to reflect on how the camp was and also remember a little bit the experience. But also for those of you who were not there, we want to tell you a little bit what camp was like this year and share the experiences that we have. And so to get started, I would like to ask you, Bhawana, was the first time that you joined Process Mining Camp this year. Why did you decide to join?
Thanks, Anna. So for me, it was just to give you a little background about myself. So I am currently working with Zalando for the last 2 years, and I handle the audit processes, internal audit. I'm part of the internal audit team over there. And for me, this was a fantastic opportunity to learn about process mining and how to use within the audit setup. So that's why I was kind of interested to join and explore more.
Excellent. Yes. So really to learn more, and specifically for the use case of process mining in audit for your work. Great. Lieven, so you were joining camp as a speaker. How was your journey to be at camp as a speaker?
Yeah, it was nice to be there as a speaker. A lot of interesting interactions. So I came into process mining 2 years ago. And I had a lot of discussions with Rudy regarding the projects which I was doing. And he asked, at a certain moment, he asked me what he saw at everything what I was doing, whether I wanted to present at that camp.
Great, yes. So I would say let's start to talk a little bit through the 2 days, because we had 2 days of camp this year. So that was also something that was new compared to the last years where it was a 1-day conference. So we really had 2 full days and a whole evening to get to know each other and to also cover a lot of ground. So we wanted to go through a little bit chronologically. So maybe I hand it over to you, Rudy, and you can maybe take us through a little bit these 2 days. What did we do these 2 days at camp?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, so this year we had 2 days of camp, right? So typically what we see, what we have done the last 13 years is we had a couple of camps which we had 2 days, but I think the last couple of years we did a 1-day camp. And what we wanted to achieve this year was to be able to dive a little bit deeper, right? So not stay on the surface and only have the talks, but be able to go deep and really learn something new in the 2 days. So we have broken it up in 2 days. So in the first day, we focused on what we call the talks, right? The presentations of the community sharing their best practices. So Lieven was one of the speakers, but we had 5 more speakers they were sharing their use cases in different areas, right? So in either an auditing domain, but also customer journey analysis. Another one was more focused on process improvement. So that's one part. For people who are completely new, we had a pre-starter with the Bootcamp. So that means they, in the morning, participated in the bootcamp to learn what process mining is and how to get started before they actually immerse themselves into the more advanced concepts. And specifically for the bootcamp, it was not the first time when that the bootcampers actually met. They had an online session even before. So there was a small online session, and then they met at camp. After the talks, they had the roundtables. So we had 9 different roundtables with different topics. And then in these roundtables, they discuss their challenges of process mining, which was used in the second day, right? So the second day was focused more around workshops. So there were 2 main practitioner workshops, one around data and the other one around processes or how to analyze these type of processes. And then we had kind of a final workshop where we brought every loose end together to look at all these organizational aspects of it before we actually said goodbye. And what we wanted to do during this session is just walk through the different concepts, to kind of understand what our takeaways are, right, and then share it with you guys. So as part of the bootcamp, what we did is you have to understand that some people are still completely new to process mining, right? So some of you are already doing this for quite a number of years. But if you are new, then you see a process mining tool and it's kind of a revelation, right? So it's, okay, this is a completely new way in order to look at these processes. And then it's not very complicated to create a process mining picture. But often they have this question, okay, but what's next? And what's kind of the impact in how I normally do things? And that's kind of the cornerstone where the bootcamp was focused on these newcomers. We had a small group, and also Lieven joined us, right? So Lieven, from my perspective, is not a newcomer at all. But he specifically asked us if he could join the bootcamp. Because
why did you join, Lieven? That's a good question. Why did you decide to join the bootcamp?
Because every time I talked with Rudy during our talks for the use of the software, I learned something new. So for me, that was okay. One of the reasons why I wanted to attend the camp was also this boot camp to see, okay, what can I do more with the software?
Yeah, and did you learn something new? So
yes, it still stands, Rudy. Each time I talk to you, I learn something new.
Oh, great! Yeah. So in this time bootcamp, what was focused? First was focused on the introductory concepts to look at the complete analysis, right, from start to finish. So how does it work? But I think the very nice aspect of what we did as a group is also a stand-up exercise, right, Lieven? So we looked at the loan process and then being able to understand, okay, what are the actual steps which you take, right? Looking at the analysis. So not only clicking through it, but kind of reasoning through the whole analysis process. And it's nice to see, right? So that how does it work and how do you use the domain knowledge or the lack of domain knowledge and then still be able to analyze. Right? Yeah, the second part, and then, of course, other people joined in as well, right? So with the talks. So this year we had 6 talks. Lieven was, of course, part of one of the talks. We had 2 banks, so one from Costa Rica and one from Serbia. We had Eric from Serco joining us and talking about process improvement concepts. Gada and Caleb from DHL, which shared their use case around auditing. And Alexandros, or Alex, which shared his use case at Online Dialogue, analyzing customer journeys. So let's start with Lieven, right? So can you give a very brief summary of your talk?
Very brief. It was a summary of exercises I did with process mining that on the one hand reported stuff to management, how their process was running, but on the other hand that I used process mining to help an individual colleague where that we wanted to visualize his issues, his troubles, to send that to management, to give more body to what he said. I have a problem. He claimed to have a problem, but we could show, okay, here is the problem and we need to tackle that. So and for me, the essence was that everybody can be an internal auditor. That it should not be only the role, but that everybody can do that who wants to dive into data.
Yeah, that was something that I really liked from your talk, Lieven. First of all, it's a nice kind of capsule or message. Everyone can be an auditor, but also what it entails is a little bit that you need to be a little bit inquisitive or maybe curious, and that's something that fits very well with process mining, right? And that's something that you also showed in your talk, which I liked, is that if you have an analysis on a certain level, you always have to look below. You have to look really closely because there could be something, that changes the interpretation if you're really looking at it, completely. And this is kind of a certain rigor that I think auditors can bring to the table.
Yeah. So one thing that kind of caught my eye was the 80-20 rule, right? So it kept coming back in the storyline. Can you tell me a little bit more where that came from?
Yeah, I have a bit of a love-hate relationship with Pareto. I mean, it's easily used by management. We have to focus on the 20% that brings 80% of the profit. But if you do a number of projects, then then you have a lot of stuff which is collecting there and where you're not doing anything with. And one of the things that surprised me with process mining was how easily you can dive into this rest, which is for big exercises, maybe not so interesting, but in the end, when you do a number of projects, let you remain with a lot of excess weights that you drag along. And that was something I wanted to bring also in my talk. If you work with data, and you have to dance with Pareto as well, because you cannot then you find a lot of stuff in your exercise and you cannot tackle all of them. So then there you use the 80-20 rule again. What is most, what brings it fast. So that was something I really wanted to bring, because I don't like Pareto on the one hand, but on the other hand, you have to use it to take steps forward. Yeah,
that's nice.
Good point. Maybe Bhawana, everyone can be an auditor, but you are already an auditor. So what were your takeaways from Lieven's presentation?
I mean, it was really good. This was he discussed the whole P2P mapping of this, so it was interesting to see. But then the specific case where he pointed out helping out a colleague where the problem was, and it was not the problem of the process, but the technical issue. So that was also a very good insight that you may never know where the problem is lying. It's not a process issue, it's not an overall process issue gap, but it was more like, okay, there was some specific issue with something else which was triggering the whole process. So able to understand that how the process is being mapped and what is triggering those issues, the root cause analysis becomes much more easier with process mining. So I think that was very good from what I understood from his the way he has presented his whole process and the presentation he gave.
Yeah, that's a good point. I forgot about that. There was either an error in the system or at least something that could be changed in the system, right?
There was indeed a bug in the system that we found through process mining by looking into that smaller part, which nobody looked into because more than 80% went okay. So, and then, but because of process mining, we looked into that, we dove deeper, and we found that there was actually a bug with an implementation.
Yeah.
Yeah. So as a speaker, there's of course also another dimension, right? When you join camp, you share your use case. It triggers also a lot of response. So what kind of response did you get from the community?
Yeah, I got a lot of talks with people during camp, but it gives also a perspective, because you hear something, people ask you what is your view on this or that, but by doing those discussions, you also get new insights yourself. I found that very useful. Because not every process is the same. Some people during camp were internal auditors, so approached it and their questions from an internal audit point of view, but others were not internal auditors and they approached it from a complete different kind of view, and that makes it very interesting. Because
do you have an example on top of mind?
Yeah, I know that I discussed with Bhawana, but that then was the internal audit point of view. But there were also other people, and I don't remember their names exactly, but that came from another part. And then because of that discussion that you have, you get new insights. It's just you have a discussion, and then afterwards your brain starts processing, and then suddenly you have we can do it like this as well.
Great.
Nice. Very nice.
Yeah, so Lieven shared his talk. This year we had also 2 talks from banks, right? So applying process mining is also popular at banks still. And there were 2 different stories, completely different from 2 banks. So one was from Costa Rica, BAC, and the other one was from OTP Bank from Serbia. And what they presented is they presented use cases from their core banking system, but one was more focused on the centralized approach, and the other was more focused on the decentralized approach. So Anne, we have seen a lot of banking examples, so I'm just curious what your thoughts were.
Yes. What I really liked here was that how they told the story, like they brought together the different business units for certain processes. So a lot of processes are already automated, but they were looking at processes that were not completely automated yet, or where there was still manual work. And then there's different teams that were responsible for that. And what they showed in their talk is that everyone was doing their work very well in their own environment, in their own little bucket, right? So they had measurements like SLAs or things like that, and they were fulfilling what they wanted to do. So they had a good performance in their mind. But if you looked at the whole process, really taking a step back from the customer perspective, then the experience for at least some of the customers was not at all good. So I think they had some kind of business customers or something who had to wait for a long time. And they showed how it's the product of everyone looking in isolation by themselves, but that this can add up to, for the customer, a really bad experience. And they even had also different things that they measured. Some of them measured volumes, like how many cases they process, like how productive they are, if you will, and others were measuring timing. So there was a mismatch, and by taking this kind of centralized, that's what you were mentioning, they had this more centralized approach, everything, and getting everyone on the same page, having the same goals for everyone, but looking also at the process and measuring from the beginning to the end from the customer perspective, they were able to make some drastic improvements without actually changing the process, but really just by this kind of change of focus, which was impressive.
Yeah, interesting to see. So we also had a talk about customer journeys, right? So customer journeys is one of the use cases which we see more often being applied in process mining. So besides having a lot of web analytics, we see that process mining adds specific value in these type of analysis to get a deeper understanding in the customer behavior. Alex kind of shared his story, how he used this, the challenges he encountered, but also the specific analysis he has done and the impact that he could make, right? For example, use process mining as part of the A/B test, as an example. And Bhawana, I was wondering, right? So because Zalando is, of course, well known as the web store, right?
Yeah.
So I was curious what your takeaways are. So you, as an auditor, you're kind of further away from that part of the business, but probably you can relate to what people in your organization are doing and how process mining could fit in.
Yeah, I mean, it was certainly a good discussion what Alex pointed out. He discussed as to one of the key insight was that a lot of customers were starting from the product page, Googling and searching, and then that was the thing. Instead of starting from the home page, a lot of people think they're starting from a point where the website is the landing page, and people focus on making it better, but then you realize it's just the product page they're landing into. So that's a good way of looking into from the business improvement perspective also. The other part, which they also discuss about that how the store footfall was not happening because there was no map as to how to reach, or directions were not properly entered. So that was also where they did the A/B testing to improve what is the better way of putting. So I think that was interesting to know the the whole movement was also to understand the conversion part of it, but then he talked about other aspects, how the process mining helped to kind of see where the process is actually starting. And that's very interesting, even in Zalando context, even though I've not been involved in that area, but I feel like from audit perspective, that could be something to look into as a starting point of the process as to what is the key areas where the clusters are, and then to work on towards understanding, what are the key touch points from customer perspective if you're evolving. Does it make sense or not?
Yeah. Yeah, and then the next talk was from Gada and Caleb, right? So they are auditors from DHL. They share the story about how parcels are being tracked and what kind of conformance analysis they can perform on it. Their position in the organization is also very typical, right? So they are kind of more positioned in the corporate centers across the different lines. So I'm very interesting to know, Bhawana, if you look at their story, right? So what are your key takeaways as an auditor? Do you recognize the same struggles?
Yeah, I think I completely understand where they were coming from, mapping their whole warehouse processes, being DHL, as to how the key points are getting triggered, and coming from the compliance angle, what are kind of important contractual regulatory aspects they need to follow. So they were able to identify as to when things were missed in the process. And other thing is, being an auditor, usually we rely on sampling as a process, but with process mining, we can do the whole population testing and not missing out anything. So that also brings out a picture. Then we can actually focus on these small exceptions which may go unnoticed. As what Lieven also said, 80-20 rule. Sometimes you don't look at a small ticket item, but you can, with this whole, you can look at the whole process as a whole. So it helps a lot in that situation. So I think that was a good use case.
Yeah, great.
Yeah, maybe one thing to add, so I always find it interesting, is if also performance can be a dimension for audit analysis, and they showed that for this particular process it could be a risk of a bad reputation, for example, if the customer experience is bad, right? So if you look at it that broadly, then more things are relevant for audit than you might think if you strictly think of kind of narrow compliance angle.
Yeah. And also, what I think was interesting to see is that the data preparation, right? So something that they did themselves as auditors, and that's also interesting to see.
Yeah.
Yeah. The closing session for the talks was from Eric, and it was an interesting use case about robots and humans, right? So that's so how can you optimize processes? I think automation is one of the key things which you can do, and he is using process mining to optimize these robots. So Lieven, what was your takeaway from?
My takeaway is, ever since I've heard this talk, I've been diving into robotic process automation myself. My main topic was I automated part of my own work from him, and I found it also very useful because he's also using process automation, process mining on the robots. They automated it already, but they are still monitoring it, whether it runs efficient, because that's something I can imagine that a lot of people forgot. It's automated, and now we leave it out there in the wild, and it does what it does. As long as it doesn't break, we don't watch it anymore. But he really compares with process mining, the robots versus the people.
Yeah, and I think what I saw is he tries to make the robot the extension of the human, right? So that also changes the story a bit. Instead of automating humans, it's more or less supporting the humans with the right tools in order to be more effective or more efficient. So after the practice talks, we went into the roundtables. And so the roundtables, we divided the whole group of the camp participants into 9 different roundtables. So to give you a couple of examples, we have change management, healthcare, Lean Six Sigma. So they could be different domains. It could be different specific topics like privacy, ethics, and responsible process mining, for example, to discuss their challenges. And so how did that work? So we assigned hosts for each of these groups. they brought the group together and supported the discussion. And the goal of the discussion is to kind of extract the different challenges. But often what we see in practice, if you ask somebody what's your biggest challenge, they have this statement, right? So data, or don't have a tool, or we don't have data, we cannot get to the data. And the goal of these groups was now to challenge each other to find kind of the root cause underneath. So it was interesting. Which group did you join, right? And what was your experience? So that's Bhawana. Can you share?
Yeah. So my group was basically financial services, but the discussion, since we're discussing the process, was very generic around the same thing issues, which I think was a good realization that everybody has similar problems with respect to data bureaucracy, how to get the right data from where and how difficult it is. Other topic which I discussed is from the engineer's point of view is like, okay, we have the data, but what do we do? What is business looking for? How do we use this data that well? And the last was more about is how do we also convince the business to use process mining, because that was also another topic of discussion as to why this is important, why do we need to use it. So that was the bigger problem of concerns they have raised also during the discussion.
Yeah. And then which group did you join, Lieven?
Yeah, I was in the administrative processes group, and it was also quite similar. Then we had discussions. We started with that and looking for root causes. One of the most interesting discussions that stayed with me was also one of the attendees of our group was somebody from college who came to look whether process mining should be on the curriculum for their students.
Yeah.
And we had that discussion as well, and that was also a very good discussion, because it even draws it broader. Which people should know something about process mining in an organization as a whole.
Yeah, and how to bring that knowledge to the right individual, right? So talking about students, I think they are looking for different type of knowledge than these senior professionals. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah. What we have done, right? So in the roundtables, in these 9 different groups, they start discussing, but they all have challenges. Some are similar, some are different, right? So to give you some examples, data, of course, is a challenge. Getting the data, but also a challenge around data privacy and security, for example. But also things like how to deal with change management. So how can these insights be brought back in a certain way to organize change, and how to deal, for example, with developing a solid business case, but also who should be the product owner or who should lead, right, these process mining initiatives, and how can you go from a one-off initiative to make it more a strategic effort or a tactical effort. And all these things came out of these workshops, and we organized it, or the groups individually organized it according to 3 topics, right? So that's either it's a process challenge, it's a data challenge, or it's a challenge that falls into another category, right? And that fits in what we wanted to do the next day, because we had 2 workshops, one around data, where we want to tackle some of these challenges, an analysis workshop to discover and analyze processes to tackle some of these challenges, and then finally a catch-all workshop where we discuss some of the remaining things to find some best practices. But before we end the first day, there was also a lot of time kind of to get to know each other, to have the discussion, because that adds a lot of value as well, right? So everyone has their own ideas, everyone has their own agenda, and there should be room in order to share these type of things, because these are valuable. And in order to get to know each other a little bit better, we had a short bingo after dinner. And that reminds me kind of to ask Bhawana, how were the chocolates?
They were good. I'm not a big fan of chocolate myself, but everybody in my team liked it. It was a good takeaway also for them to share with them, and it was really, really nice. Everybody liked it.
Okay, excellent. Yeah, it pays off to be competitive, right? So,
Yes, definitely.
Yeah. I wanted to add also that I think that having the whole evening, that really also made a difference compared to the last years. Yeah, we had a dinner after the talks, but then was kind of over. And I think having these 2 days and having the full evening to really talk to everyone, which of course we already got into discussions through the roundtables and things like that. I think that gave people a lot of opportunity to really have more discussions and really dive deeper in this exchange. So we should keep that for the next years.
Yeah, and interesting thing, the program was not enough, right? So we had the dinner, we had the meeting, we had the drinks, but eventually a small group in their own initiative went for a city tour, right? So that's also interesting to hear that they organized themselves and they went sightseeing. Yeah. So during the second day, we really had the opportunity to go and dive deeper into the workshop. So that's something new we added to last year's to this edition. And so we had a data workshop and we had a process workshop. The data workshop I facilitated, and the process workshop ended. So I can kind of give a little bit of an overview of what we did in the data workshop, because we know data is one of the challenges of process mining, right? So if you're doing this for the first time, it could be that you are lacking data skills, right? So because it's difficult, it's a completely different skill than mapping out processes, for example, or analyzing processes per se. Especially if you have large amount workshop to people who are less familiar with processing data, to give them a tool. So in this case, we used KNIME as a tool to extract the data, but also to understand what kind of decisions do I need to take. So how do I deal with the big data set? How can I make it smaller, make it repetitive? Because sometimes people are used to copy and pasting in Excel this data. That works, right? If you need to do one-off. But if you need to do this more continuously, then it's more difficult, right? Because that copy and pasting takes a lot of time. And then finally, if you want to extend this to make it more integrated, then of course we offered an option after preparing the data, how you can pull it into a database and then pull it into Disco again. And these are kind of focused on working on our skills and improving our skills to be able to do this. So I'm very interesting to see and to hear, Lieven. Did you learn something new? You are already quite literate with data, right? You are using Python and other type of tools. So for you, it was not to learn a new tool. But how did you experience the workshop?
Well, I found it very useful, and I did learn a new tool. I didn't know KNIME. And it for me it solved actually an issue that I had, because I used indeed Python and notebooks, but that means many people in my organization don't know how to do with that. So I have to export this out of and then put this into Excel again to do that. And I think the tool is much closer to so that people who work with Excel, they can follow what happens there. While reading it in a notebook, what you do is quite difficult. I once showed my notebook to my manager and said, okay, these are the steps I did to clean the data. I said, oh, this is Chinese for me. And I think with what comes out of KNIME, that you have the flow with what you do on all the different steps, it's much more easier for somebody who's not working with the data, but to still understand what you have done.
Yeah.
So that was for me a good...
just to understand. So the difference is then, if I understand you correctly, it's not programming, but it's more like configuration, right?
Yeah. It's... Personally, I don't think what you do with Python in the notebooks is also not programming. It's just things to clean up your data. You have to know the code, but the thing is in the end, what you can present of what you have done, that is much more comprehensible for somebody who is not into the data gathering and cleaning exercises, because it's you did this, you did that, and most of the people where you talk about, they have Excel knowledge, and because of all these steps, I do this, I gather that. It's more, Excel talk. I call it that way, that they can comprehend, so that you can show them the flow chart of what you did, and then finally say, okay, this is the result which I imported then in my analysis for process mining.
I'm curious, Bhawana, how's that for you? Which kind of tools are you using? Or there's also audit tools, right?
Yeah, so the thing is, I am one of those people who are from the Excel, more use of Excel much. I do use Python, but it's very limited. So I think for me, that's why 9 was very intuitive, because I could see and people can actually write the steps. So I understand where Lieven is coming from. That would be a very good tool for business perspective, especially dealing with people who deal with Excel day in and out spreadsheets. So this is very good tool to use. Plus, it can, of course, manage large amount of data, which Excel has a problem with. So I think for a person who have not gone into maybe using Python or any other ETL tool, this is a very good tool to use and work with.
Yeah, so one of the things which I find interesting, right? So we are doing this for quite some time, and Excel has been, I think, the most adopted tool for preparing process mining data, but it kind of shifted. So I was kind of surprised. I had a quick quiz at the beginning to kind of understand what people are using, right, and how much data they can process. And it's common that they can process more than 1 million rows, right? So it's not difficult for people anymore to have that amount of data. Well, I think a couple of years ago, I think there were just a few people who were able to deal with these types of amount of data. So I think there is something changing there as well, that the skill that people have in preparing data is growing, right? So I think they are more used to doing this. But then the challenge is, of course, these more advanced concepts, right? So we started with some basic combining 2 data sets together, but eventually we transitioned into some of the more advanced concepts. And I think that's still interesting, kind of, to be able to teach this and then to experience this in this workshop setup, right? So it's kind of a laboratory. You can make mistakes, so it doesn't matter. And then you can practice before you actually bring it to your own workspace.
Right, and this is also something I wanted to add. It's, of course, not about learning a tool, right? That's just, of course, in the end, you need a tool to do the work. But in the workshop, what you have focused on is to really get people thinking about the choices they need to make, right? Because if you combine 2 data sets, if you enrich the data, you have to know more or less what you want to get out of it, and it requires the mental model for process mining to be there, and so there's quite some things to think through. So that was the focus, of course. Yeah,
and also to learn that it's never the ideal model, right? Which you have eventually, because you extract the data. Maybe the data was never designed in order to be used for process mining, but you then do. So it also requires some work in order to add events, for example, or add new timestamps that give you a deeper understanding to answer these specific questions. So a process miner needs to be practical in that sense as well, to be able to wing it with what you have, but also keep in mind what you eventually want to achieve to improve the quality of these.
But also to have a tool, and that I found very, very useful, where you can walk back because you do something with your data. And if you only work in Excel, the big problem is what you did, and then walk back on your steps, walk 2 steps back. There I probably made a mistake, and start from there again.
Yeah.
And have tools that make that easier. Because you will have to do some iterations.
Yeah, and eventually you can integrate this, right? So that's also one of the challenges. Sometimes, if you think about it, you can make it very big, and then you need to set up a complete infrastructure, right, with a data warehouse and everything in order to be connected. Maybe I've seen that companies spend 2 years, right, to have this before they actually start their process mining. But you can also think about it to make it a little bit more practical, and then kind of grow it from this one-off initiative, but reuse the things which you have developed and then make that part of the infrastructure. And that's kind of where we ended the data workshop. And so the result of this KNIME workflow, and so it looks something like this.
Yes, I think we can show it.
Yeah.
Try to bring it up.
And so we have that KNIME workflow, and that workflow is kind of describing the steps you actually are taking in order to produce that event log. But you can use that result as an event log to push that back into a database and then pull that out using Disco. Right, so here kind of we see this on the top left. We have a KNIME tool where we can construct these workflows. But eventually one of these components can be saved to a database or a data store, and then eventually use an airlift component where we can connect directly to that database to pull data directly into Disco. And then you have a more repetitive setup, right? So if you want to have this data to be continuously updated, then you can pull at any time the recent data set to your analysis. And then you are leveraging that development piece of that one-off, but build that into an infrastructure where you do this more continuously. Okay, yeah, so that was the data workshop. So, and
now we're coming to the process workshop. That was indeed the second one, and we did them in parallel, so everyone did all workshops. So that was also something that was new this year. When we used to have workshops in the past, people had to choose, and it was always, some of them were mad because they wanted to do all of them. So this year everyone did all of the workshops, but in different orders. In the process workshop, we took a different starting point. The starting point was that we already have a data set. So a data set that's possible to use with process mining. But then once you import the data in the process mining tool, there are actually quite a few things that are important to check and that you need to do some common practices before you start analyzing the data. And so we were focusing on this very first thing that you're doing when you try to understand the process, the data and the process behind it. And so, for example, we were looking at incomplete cases, right? How can you understand the start and the end points in the process to see which of the cases in the data are not completed yet? And partly this is done by domain knowledge, but that's always also a thing. As the process mining analyst, you're not always a subject matter expert. So it's also interesting to see, like, what can you actually do just with the tool and with the patterns that you see in the data without having the domain knowledge yourself, so that you can make some pre-analysis and then check it with the domain expert later. So we looked at incomplete cases. We also looked at how you can take different perspectives on the process, and had an example where you have to separate the process issues from data issues, right? So data quality is something, of course, you need to look as well. But then one important piece that we also spend some time with is to try to get an overview of the process. So most processes, when you look at them with process mining, are complicated because you're looking, like Bhawana said before, you're not looking at samples, but you're looking at the whole data, right? 100% of all the purchase orders, for example, that were processed in 1 year, or all the patients that were following this treatment for the amount of time that you're looking at this process. So you have naturally a complexity, and there are different strategies to get an overview and try to understand the main process. And one of the methods that I wanted to highlight here once more is the milestone method, which I think is a very effective method where you can choose out of many different activities and many different types of events just the most important milestones, like, for example, the beginning of the process, the end, and then some important ones in the middle. And then by ignoring or hiding everything in between, you get a very simplified view, which still shows you all of the cases, but in this kind of, from this bird's eye perspective. And of course, afterwards, you often go deeper again, and you bring in the details to understand, detailed aspects, but can be a good way to to get an overview and then continue with your first analysis.
So Lieven, what was your takeaway from Anne's workshop?
Well, that I need to dive deeper in still. So there were new topics that I said, on this, okay, I didn't take that into account, or I took it into account, but I could have dove deeper into that to exclude this on that. That was, something that I took away, that I could still go deeper than what I did.
Great.
For me also, like this whole focusing on certain aspects is very interesting, and then you can also like then see the critical statistics for people who are performing as to what is the key area. Other than that, like having to see the whole process, like how you understand as an auditor when you talk to people and what you see with data is very different. So I think that is also something you can learn as to what there could be certain edge cases which people don't talk about it, but then you can see through the process. So that would be also interesting to see through this whole process mining. That was also like kind of way to look at this was very interesting and take a good takeaway from how I can use it in audit.
Great. Yeah. So that was another question. So do you see yourself applying this already? So after the camp and with your
I did once.
Okay.
I did once. I did use Python for that, a simple one, like for example, and then I could see there was no gap in the process, which was also a good thing to know that you don't find any sort of issue, which is also a good thing for auditor, like yes. That they know like the process is working fine. So maybe it's not always that you will find some sort of, because as an auditor you're always train in your mind to look for anomaly. But then when you don't see it, is also a good thing to see that you can rely, okay, I have checked 100% of data, I've not relied on sample, and it shows that there are no gaps, which is also a good thing to know and have good understanding. Yeah.
So good results are also results. So sometimes I see from an auditing perspective, it's also good to know that if you use the same 80-20 rule of Lieven, right? So then you can look at the 80% and then validate, okay, at least for 80% I can say it's good, right? So that's also a positive result.
It's true, yeah.
Exactly.
But and you can also learn, I mean, because you can easily see the 20% which is not okay, or the small ones. You can take out one of those edge cases and discuss with the people what happened here. This is the case. Can you explain? And then in some cases they can perfectly explain, but then even for them, this is an exercise in thinking about why did this edge case happen, and what can we learn, and how can we prevent it from happening again, or
exactly.
I mean, it shows the potential risk areas also. Like as an auditor, you follow the process. Okay, it's working fine, but then you see these edge cases and you mean like, okay, you don't have enough control, which can also lead to the process going wrong. Or as one which Lieven also said, there was an IT issue in certain processes, you assume it to be right, and usually you do one sample test, okay, the control works, but you never know as a whole data set that it can go somewhere, that something is small thing can trigger the whole control to go wrong. So that way is also interesting.
Or look more holistically, right? And then identify the key areas of risk which you see in the remainder of the 20%.
Exactly.
Right? Excellent. Yeah, perfect. So the final workshop in the second day was more around organizational best practices. It was kind of a bit broader, right? So we saw some of the topics being brought in by the community, which extended even the topics we cover in the workshop, right? So we brought them also into the final workshop. And the approach which we took was quite pragmatic, but the idea was we were discussing different things already in 48 hours, right? And then we want to condense it to some of the best practice which we can take home. And so we had a couple of rounds. So we made very small groups with 3 individuals discussing one of the challenges, and then figure out at least one best practice which you can take away.
Yeah, they could only pick one. That's the challenge. We did not want to get like a lot. We wanted each group to choose and agree on one, the single best, and then the next group
assuming
comes.
that the top one is the best one, and then we have a couple others which can be used. And these rounds were very short, right? So we needed to condense everything in just 5 minutes, right? So they had rounds of 5 minutes, and we brought it down when they are more used to generating these ideas. And then we did that, I think, for 20 rounds or something like that.
Yeah, there were 18 challenges, and
18
we
challenges,
did like six rounds or something.
Yeah. So collecting all of these best practices. So it's interesting to know. So how was it, right? So it's kind of harsh to condense everything in that 1 hour, right? So we have a whole camp to discuss everything freely, and then all the ideas which are then in your head are kind of condensed into paper. So how was that, Bhawana?
Yeah, for me, it was actually one of the favorite runs, to be honest, because I think it also like the first day we all came with the problems, and then you can see and discuss people with a larger group of these problems. And then when you go to a different round, you see, oh, one of your problem has already been answered through the best practices, which have been discussed, which was also interesting. So, and also like when you are talking about your best practices, what worked for you, and there is also like, because you're discussing with people, there's also a challenge coming in from there. It's like, hey, what about this? What about that? And we realize, okay, that may not be the right way to look, or they realize, oh, that's a good thing. So I think that was one of the good things where you find solution to the problems we discussed yesterday. So it was very, very interesting.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. There were different people as a group every round, right? So you need to adjust and agree with that group with maybe different perspectives. Yeah. How was it for you, Lieven?
Well, I found it a very good way of brainstorming. It was very useful because there are a lot of people, and usually in brainstorming they put them in groups, but the groups are then quite big. And this was actually good. You had changes, and you were with only 3 people, which made the discussions went more directly in depth. And then it was actually, it was not easy to select just one, but it was a lot easier to select just one because you were only with 3 people to discuss. Mm-hmm. And afterwards I went around the table and I looked at everything, and I found that there were a lot of good ideas and in all the different kinds, because indeed we did 6 rounds, so nobody went completely around the table, but then still you could see, okay, there's a lot of good input here.
Yeah. So as a next step, what we did, of course, is provided everyone with at least 5 choices to pick the best option. Yeah. So what's your most memorable best practices which you brought home?
For me, it was like having to have innovative lab. I think that's something I would like, and also like for process mining, they discussed like to have a team with different people who are into this whole group and then working to get towards. So I think those were the 2 interesting things for me that I could think right out of. But there were many. I mean, there were so many over there.
Yeah. And for you, Lieven?
Well, there were indeed many, but one of the things was to embed it into your organization, the ideas of that at least senior management should put there a concept that what you append to, what you uphold to for your for embedding process mining in your organization. That was a very good one, where I want to do some discussions internally with us as well, how we can implement that.
And that's also what we are continuing on, and so we have just released a blog post, kind of giving an overview of all the challenges which we discussed during camp, but also the best practices. And that blog post is now available on a blog, so you can find it either through the website or probably you have got our mail with a link directly to that blog post.
Yeah, exactly. So that's something that we promised on that day, that we said, okay, we are capturing all of these best practices together with the whole community, but it's not just for now and lost afterwards, but we will capture it, collect it, condense it, and this is what we did. And so we have this blog post available now, which is called Process Mining Challenges, and so there you can find also the same grouping that we just mentioned. So there are data challenges, process challenges, and then organizational challenges. And for each of the challenges, we did some grouping. So there were 20, and we grouped it like into more than, I think there were 30 40 challenges. We grouped it into 13, and then we also condensed the best practices for it. So that's kind of the collection and the outcome of the Process Mining Camp and what all of you did with us. So that's really nice, I think, to have that.
Yeah, and very interesting, I think, for everyone to take a look at, right? So everyone can kind of relate to what their challenges are. And it doesn't have to mean that everyone has the same challenges, right? So you have different organizations, different background, different cultures. As a process miner, you have different skills and also different backgrounds, right? So the challenges can be in different areas, but it's at least interesting to see in which area you see your challenges, but what kind of best practices others have for you.
Yeah.
Yeah, for me, the hardest part of camp is to say goodbye, right? So after the 2 days, we again have to say goodbye and then kind of look back. So for me, it was interesting to know you had probably some expectations, right, which you also shared. If you look back, what are things you took home which you didn't expect from camp?
For me, I guess it was more like how to look at the process, what Anna's workshop talked, and I also talked about the key insights. I think that was very interesting to look into that. How do you, when you have the whole, like, for example, the spaghetti process mapping, so how do you set your focus on and what to look at? I think that was very interesting as to what, and I think that helped me a lot also. That's why I started now think of the areas where I could. And second was like, okay, it's not just our organization, everybody struggles with data. So that was also there, like, okay, good to know.
Yeah.
So,
Oh, perfect. And Lieven, for you?
Yeah, for me, I came to the camp. I wanted to learn more. I have learned a lot during the camp, so that was very good. And then one of the other things I noted down to myself was that there are a lot of internal auditors using these tools, and I know that I came for the speaker as being internal audit, but I had no idea how big it was in internal audit. And now, because the talk that I brought, then I was not in internal audit. Now, meanwhile, I have moved to another job, and now I am in internal audit. So for me, this is a good one. When I came back, I said, listen, guys, this really is a good tool, and we should also invest more in using this and seeing how we can use this.
Excellent, great. And how did your organization respond, right? Because you took time, right, to prepare your story, and that always takes time to make sure that you carve out your story. You can do a process mining initiative, but telling about the process mining initiative is often another thing, right? So did you get any responses internally, or did you share your story also internally? So not only at camp?
Not yet. The thing is, so because I changed position, what I did share internally was, okay, we should in internal audit start using this more, because indeed that part I did share.
Yeah.
But I want to discuss back with the manager from in the team where I brought the talk from. I wanted to discuss how he is now going to embed it within his organization, because I know that he asked certain people to take over process mining from me within his team, but I know that we are a bit struggling with how can we embed that.
Okay. Yeah. So more work to be done.
But the different use cases, that's also something that I really like. Besides the international aspect, I think it's nice that people come from all over the world and from different countries, but also that they have different use cases. So auditors are a group that is growing, but you also have process improvement experts and customer journeys, for example, as a use case, right? Which is often particularly challenging because of the complexity that these types of processes present. And so having this mix of people who are coming from all of these different backgrounds and different use cases, but still, like we discussed, the challenges are often quite similar, right? Like with the discussion roundtables, you start from a certain place, but challenges are similar. So you can have this exchange with people from quite a different field.
Regarding the process improvement, there's one example which was discussed, come to my mind for the banking part, where they were looking at the time of how the credit cards were sent, and they realized the KPI they have for like 2-3 days, then they realized average time was much lesser, and you could reduce the KPI to much lesser time, which also was interesting, that how you can also use to improve your KPI and set better benchmarking or better timelines.
Yeah, nice example. Exactly.
And one of the things that I with the same one that also was with me, that you have to look at your complete process, because in some cases they noticed that they didn't make it, but that was because people were working in different locations. So it was assigned and then they weren't there, so they handled it during the time they had, but they were in another location handling topics over there. So, and also by doing that process mining and see where it conflicted, they had that discussion to say, okay, we have here the KPI, but we have to take into account that our people work sometimes in 2 offices.
Yeah. Yeah, good point. Yeah, you really have to understand the process behind it, right? To interpret correctly. Yeah. What do you see?
Yeah, so are there any other final things?
Any last words?
Any last words about camp or things that we missed in our discussion that we should share?
I think the whole experience was very interesting for me, just because one is this, I really find certain training which are in English. So for me, it was also good sort of a training or a workshop to understand not just a topic, but also to get to meet a lot of people from different areas who are kind of data driven and trying to, do something around it. So that was actually a very good experience for me indeed.
Nice.
Okay. Yeah, I think we should thank Bhawana and Lieven for joining us and sharing their camp experiences. And yeah, we are of course looking forward to see you at camp next year, and everyone. I hope everyone is excited. Please take a look at the blog post as well, right, which is out to give you kind of an idea of all the challenges which we have discussed during camp, and we'll continue to find best practices for and solutions for, right? So that's something we keep on doing, and what will be our next Café topic?
Yes, I just want to mention one more thing before we say that. So I also want to thank you both, Bhawana and Lieven, for joining. And I want to remind everyone who's watching this now, who maybe they didn't know about it yet, that we will publish also the videos from the practice talks, so not the workshops and the whole experience, of course, if you weren't there. That's not something that you can get afterwards, but the talks that we mentioned in the beginning, they will be shared. And you can sign up at the camp mailing list to be notified when the videos are available. And we will share the link where you can sign up with the show notes of this when we publish the video in 1 or 2 weeks from this Café session. And of course, you can join next year's camp as well. So you will be the first to know when next year's camp takes place. And we hope to see you there. Yes, thanks everyone for joining. It was a really good, revisit. Really nice to revisit this year's camp. And thank you all for joining us. Watching us right now. We will be back after the summer break, so there will be a summer break now, and we will be back in September with a new Process Mining Café about audit research, actually, so it could be interesting for both of you. All right, thanks everyone, have a great rest of the week. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.